So there are still people that follow Warren Jeffs living here today.
Okay.
And there's also some that live here that are following another man. You would never guess this, but a lot of the walls have been taken down.
Really?
So there
Because
used
I
to be
feel
a
like
lot
there's
more.
so many that I have seen driving around.
The FLDS believes in keeping things they were when Joseph Smith was the prophet. Keep Sweet, I think that is still attached to Rulon Jeff's old home. That is a really big home that had a lot of additions added to it as he married more wives. And they have no idea what to expect either. So even if abuse is happening to them, they wouldn't know that it's abuse. They would assume this is normal because it's the only experience they've ever had.
When I was driving around, I probably still saw maybe like 50 houses with Zion.
This is my childhood home.
Oh, wow.
No one lives here now. It's been abandoned for quite some time. Over here is where a lot of his wives were supposed to stay. Then you have this like courtyard in here that's completely surrounded with these extremely thick walls. It would be a lot more scary for the girls because they have no idea at what age they're going to get married.
I mean, I've driven around here today, and yesterday quite a bit, and I haven't had anyone follow me.
Yes.
And we were immediately followed.
Hey everyone, Sam here with Growing Up in Polygamy. Today I am here with Alyssa. It's been a lot of fun walking around my hometown here where I was raised in the FLDS church. Hope you enjoy.
You know, I actually came to Colorado City. Me and my husband drove through here in like 2015.
Oh wow, okay.
2013, like that, you know, right when we were first married. And this was still all totally like nice and new.
Right.
I mean, I've driven around here today, and yesterday quite a bit, and I haven't had anyone follow me.
Yes.
And we were immediately followed.
It's a very different place now. Very, very different place. And we can talk about people being followed in that as we walk around the meeting house here. Joseph F. Smith was the one that finally said, okay, we are not doing this anymore. And that was the end of it. But because Wilford Woodruff signed the manifesto admitting that this is not a law of God, basically, the FLDS church say he's a fallen prophet.
Okay.
Even though he practiced polygamy himself, because he was willing to admit that it wasn't called of God, they said he's obviously not a prophet then.
Damn, okay.
Yeah. So, and then from there, things just went a different direction. This is the meeting house, what's left of it. It has been torn down basically and is being rebuilt for a type of community center. Oh, okay. So it's kind of cool to see that they're going to use it for good because so many stories and so many even negative stories are told about this meeting house and kind of what it represents. As a young boy, I remember sitting in these meetings, so many meetings. Seems like we were always in meetings. In the FLDS, even though it was a very tight community and we did a lot together, everybody kind of knew each other, we were still separate by family. We were supposed to kind of keep to ourselves and not really make a lot of friends outside of our own families, which is interesting. Wow. But even within the community, the families were pretty separate, and the rules were very different depending on which family you belonged to. And
like, were the rules dependent on your hierarchy within the FLDS, basically?
A lot did have to do with that. The families that were really high up in the church generally had more strict rules, and the ones that were not so high up in the church, it's crazy. Some of the stuff they got away with, I couldn't believe it. I mean, my father he had a very high calling in the church. He was the mayor of Hilldale. So everybody knew him, so we had to be very, very careful and try to set an example. His name's David Zitting.
Still FLDS?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
he
is.
Here?
I don't believe he lives in this area anymore. Okay. In fact, not all, but a lot of those that follow Warren Jeffs today have been told to leave.
Right.
And basically, the reason behind that is too many people that have left the church or apostates are moving back to the community, and so they're not supposed to be here mingling with them. Yeah,
I saw something that basically the U.S. or the Utah government kind of seized a lot of property from the FLDS.
Yes.
And then it's been reallocated or sold, and a lot of people who left the faith have come back to kind of reclaim their family home or their home of their childhood. Yes, basically coming back and paying the back taxes, because a lot of people, Warren Jeffs was telling people not to pay the taxes on their property. Okay. And of course, that's where all the evictions came from. So those that were raised here and had childhood homes here, if they were willing to come and pay the back taxes, they got their homes back. Oh. okay.
So a lot of people were coming back and paying that fee.
When I was driving around, I probably still saw maybe like 50 houses with Zion. Is that just because people leave it up because of whatever, or are those people still FLDS?
So there are still people that follow Warren Jeffs living here today.
Okay.
And there's also some that live here that are following another man that claims to be the prophet now.
Okay.
And there are a few of those men that are doing that.
Okay.
So maybe some of those Zion signs are from those people. Okay. And it could also be an empty home, someone that just left the home and no one's living there at this point.
Okay.
So.
Because he kind of has moved his family out as a way to protect them, or like continue to hide them.
Yes, well, that's the rumor. And Warren Jeffs at one time had about 80 wives. So he had a lot of wives, so many that a lot of us in the community didn't know how many he had. And a lot, or I should say most of those wives are still waiting for him to break out of prison.
Because they still fully believe he'll come back.
Yep.
And he's probably prophesied that he'll come back.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So
he's taught that the Heavenly Father will break down the prison walls, and he will walk free like prophets of old.
Wow.
Like, breaking down the stories of Samson and things like that from the Bible. Yeah. So they believe it. They believe that one day he will walk free and come back and gather his people again and prepare them to be lifted up, or for the great destructions, as they would call them.
Kind of the downside of religious persecution is it makes people more radicalized, and it proves he's a prophet because he's being persecuted.
Right.
And it makes them more, I feel like if you're already so deeply in, it makes you more embedded into your cult.
Yes, it's true. It seems like the more strict the rules got, the more firm the people got in their beliefs. They really just continue to follow him no matter what, because they have been told, and I was told my whole life, that the end was coming and that the tests were going to get harder. And so when things got more difficult, we just assumed, oh yeah, this is exactly what we were waiting for, which means that the end is near. We have to be more faithful.
Yeah. Well, this is crazy.
This is the first time I've seen that gate.
Really? Probably because they
closed.
Saw your YouTube videos.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I was here recently, and there were people working on the meeting house here, and I just walked in and said, wow, what some beautiful changes you got. And they didn't like that. They kicked me out. So it looks like they're getting more strict about people walking in, and I think this just has so much attention. This town has so much attention now that Warren Jeffs has been in prison for so many years, and he's still to this day, from his prison cell, is leading the FLDS people.
Right. He's just making a lot of phone calls.
Yeah, phone calls, or writing his so-called revelations. I would like to know why it is that every member that gets, or any leader that gets caught and put in prison for abuse of any kind, just
can still...
They get obsessed with writing their stories, and that the world has to hear their beliefs, and writing these, what they call revelations. And you see it time and time again, and Warren Jeffs is no different. He's writing all these revelations, making rules more and more strict for the FLDS people.
Is it true? I've heard that there were, at least for a while, there were no more marriages allowed, and basically he kind of froze the community because nobody can move past his incarceration.
I know that I'll get hate for this comment, but my personal belief is that Warren Jeffs put an end to relationships. Even those that were already married, husbands and wives, they could no longer touch other than shaking each other's hands.
Wow.
No hugs, nothing like that. My personal belief is Warren Jeffs said, if I can't have anything, they can't have anything either. It was a control move. That's what I believe. Right over here, you see these doors on the back of the meeting house. Like I say, everything's torn up now. It used to look so different, but this is where Warren Jeffs and some of the leaders of the FLDS church would escape if the FBI showed up or law enforcement showed up to catch them. They had an escape route. They would rush out these doors, jump on four-wheelers that would take them straight down into the creek here, as we call it, the crick, and just they had an escape route. They would head down in the creek and they would just take off and hide from law enforcement.
How often did something like that happen?
I think law enforcement showed up here or had eyes on the building a lot, just to see if one of the leaders would walk in. I personally remember sitting here once when the FBI did show up, and we were bowing
What year would have
this would have been in 2000 and I want to say 2004, 2005.
How old were you?
I would have been 17.
Okay.
Yeah, 16 or 17.
Okay.
It was a long time ago. I'm
But
forgetting
fully,
everything.
I mean, yeah, that's old enough to have a very firm memory of it.
Yes, but we were bowing our heads for prayer, and all of a sudden we heard a super loud commotion in the doors right over here, which we can see. On this side of the building, there was these big glass doors to the entrance, and we heard this loud commotion, and it was the FBI trying to get in and catch the leaders. And so we heard this loud commotion. We had bodyguards, FLDS bodyguards, that were holding him back. Eventually, they broke through the barrier, and by the time I opened my eyes to see what was going on, all of the leaders of the church were off the stand. They had disappeared.
Wow.
So we looked up, and it was just a person saying the prayer at the pulpit. That's all there was. So they were very well prepared to escape if someone tried to get them from this meeting house here.
And I mean, it took them years to find Warren Jeffs, right?
Yes, they've started looking for him. I believe he was put on the top 10 most wanted in 2003 or 2004. They finally caught him in 2006.
Wow.
So he escaped them for a long time.
Did they arrest any of the other leaders? I've only ever heard of Warren Jeffs, but you'd think there'd be a lot of accomplices.
Yes, and they did catch a lot of the accomplices. They released most of them and then caught them again for something else they did later, and then they keep releasing them because there's not enough evidence on these other people for a lifetime sentence. Okay. Yes.
And was this a secondary meeting house?
No, this actually here is a schoolhouse.
Okay, because it looks so similar.
Right, so this is a schoolhouse, and I actually did some time in homeschool. In fact, it was in this door right here, in this corner of the building, where I was sitting as a young boy and learned about the Twin Towers being hit by the airplanes.
In that building, wow.
In that building. Now, you may see this building and think I had a normal education. Even though we did meet in different buildings throughout the community, we were homeschooled.
Okay.
So it was always one of the mothers. I had four mothers growing up in the home. It was always one of the mothers or one of my older siblings that would teach us any kind of school.
Do you feel like when you think about your education, do you think like a fairly good education, or was it pretty low level? I'm curious how
we did have books from the outside world. Originally, we were allowed to have some books, and we had some trainings and some different types of material that Warren Jeffs himself created.
Okay.
So when I lived out here, I thought I had a fairly good education. But when I left in 2008, yes, I realized very quickly how little of an education I had. I could read fairly well, and that's that. That's all I could do.
But math?
So, math, I still struggle with math to this day, because the first time I went to an actual math class was when I was 22 years old, I believe. 21, 22 years old, after my mission for the LDS church.
Which is kind of crazy to me that you left the FLDS, this hyper-religious setting, and then you went and served a Mormon mission for another 2 years.
Right.
Like the full first 20 years of your life was totally dominated by these religious groups.
Right. After living and growing up in the FLDS church, a Mormon mission was just normal life to me.
Yeah.
We weren't allowed to date. We weren't allowed to swim. We weren't allowed to listen to what we call Gentile music. We weren't allowed to watch movies or TV. So it was just I'm familiar with this. So the FLDS belief is, very similar to the original beliefs of the mainstream LDS church. They originate from the same place. They believe in Joseph Smith, that he saw the Father, God, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost, and saw them and communed with them. They believe that. They believe that Joseph Smith was the first prophet of this dispensation or of the restored gospel.
And you guys would read the Book of Mormon growing up. Did you have the same hymn book?
Yes. Well, that's a great question. So same Book of Mormon we would read growing up. In fact, during my childhood here in Colorado City, we would often go to Deseret book to get the Book of Mormon and the Bible and things like that. As you know, the mainstream LDS church has changed a lot with the times to try to keep up with society to the best of their ability. Obviously, a lot of people would say that they're nowhere close, but compared to the FLDS church, the mainstream is completely modern. They've made changes. The FLDS believes in keeping things they were when Joseph Smith was the prophet. And from there, Joseph Smith, they believe in Brigham Young as a prophet, John Taylor as a prophet, and then came Wilford Woodruff. Yes.
Yes. Did you learn the song? You probably didn't learn the song of Latter-day Prophets are number one, Joseph Smith.
No, because we had
the prophets anymore.
we had only the three, and then from John Taylor came John Woolley, and then Lauren Woolley, John Y. Barlow, and then it just went down a different line of prophets, because Wilford Woodruff was the official, started putting an end to polygamy. He wasn't the one that really put an end to it, but he signed a manifesto basically getting the government off of the church's back.
And that's when they were able to join the U.S. as a state, right?
To make Utah a state. So they were kind of, their hands were tied. They kind of had to force them to sign this document to say, yeah, we're going to stop practicing polygamy. And then Utah was able to become a state. And also the government was threatening to take away their money, take away their property and things like that. So they were kind of backed up against the wall.
I've seen a lot of people call Wilford Woodruff a hero. Like, he made the hardest choice, which was to end polygamy, and nobody was wanting it or willing to do it. And I feel like modern members would view him as one of the most influential prophets who did this great thing, got this great revelation and made the modern church possible. Yes.
And so it's interesting because the FLDS have a different story. My father was, my grandfather was one of the key people that kind of got the FLDS church rolling in the direction of leaving the mainstream LDS church and continuing on with the polygamy. So my father, I never met my grandfather, but my father was also very much familiar with the church history and the split off. And so I heard a different story growing up, that it wasn't really Wilford Woodruff that put an end to polygamy. Wilford Woodruff, sure, he signed the manifesto, but it wasn't until Joseph F. Smith that two prophets later that finally said, okay, no more. Yeah. We're not doing this anymore.
Because Wilford Woodruff, he still was with his wives. John Taylor was still, those prophets were still kind of had wives.
Exactly.
And they didn't break up the families.
Yes, they didn't break up the families, and there were still some people getting married in polygamous marriages, but in secret at that. Okay, so we made our way to the baby cemetery in the FLDS community, and a lot of people are wondering why there is a baby cemetery here. Why is it separate from the main cemetery, which is on the other side of town? And there's a lot of rumors and speculation about what's going on here. A lot of law enforcement people are concerned that maybe there's something really sketchy going on. When I was raised here, I was under the impression that it was simply where the babies were buried that were stillborn or died very, very shortly after they were born and were perfect spirits. They didn't have any chance of corrupting or sinning anything like that in their life. So they were buried in this special spot for perfect spirits.
Which is the same, the mainstream Mormon church has the same belief.
Right.
If a baby is stillborn, it's because the baby was so perfect in the pre-earth life, it doesn't need to be tested in this life, and it can just go basically from the mortal to the afterlife and go straight to God, essentially.
Right. And were you told the same thing, that if a child was born, stillborn, or died very soon after being born, that they had proved themselves in the spirit world before coming here, that they were valiant and perfect.
Yeah, same word, valiant, extra valiant in the war in heaven.
Right.
And because they were so valiant in the war in heaven, and the same thing for people who are born with really severe mental incapacities.
Another thing that I've heard from people that are still active in the FLDS church is that this cemetery is here because of the very close in proximity to the clinic where all the babies were born. So they said it was very convenient to have a location nearby for the babies. Now, that didn't really make sense to me. That's just what I was told, because you're not going to have a stillborn baby and toss them into a graveyard nearby, right? Like there should be a service.
Right.
And there should be some time between. So
but you didn't have any services?
So there is one baby, a half sibling that I have in here, but she was born and a stillborn and was buried before I was ever born. Okay. So it wasn't something that I personally experienced.
I know when I spoke with the other man who grew up in the FLDS, he also said that he said that he thinks there's more infant deaths in the FLDS because there's a lot of inbreeding, because there's not like enough records kept, basically, so that none of the cousins marry each other, or the,
right.
You know what I mean?
And that is true, and very unfortunate that some of the babies buried here are not on any kind of state registry. They don't exist.
Right,
and
that's because you didn't receive a birth certificate.
I did, yes.
You did? Okay.
Yes. So
congratulations.
Thank you. I'm legal. I'm alive. So unfortunately, as time went on, after Warren Jeffs was put in prison, there were a lot of assigned, how do you even say this? Assigned relationships where there were these men called seed bearers that were the only ones allowed to have children. And some of these children don't exist on any kind of paper document.
And that's because, I guess, why were some permitted to be on paper documentation and some weren't?
I think that while Warren Jeffs has been in prison, most of them, at least based on what I've been told, have not been registered.
Wow, okay.
So, but before he was put in prison, and before he started making a lot of these really just odd and strange rules for the people, before that, things were a lot more, I guess you could say, normal, more normal than they are now.
From what I've heard, like, Rulon Jeffs was, I mean, there's all these prophets, all of these people who are still practicing polygamy, but it seems like some prophets were trying to make it as moral, I guess, as possible, saying, no cousins marrying, you need to be 18, we're not going to marry sisters, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Basically, that it was under Warren Jeffs, it became way more twisted, illegal, underage brides and that kind of thing.
What I call a good childhood that I had out here was when Rulon Jeffs was the prophet. Now, some of the things Rulon Jeffs was doing behind closed doors, I don't even want to think about, because one of my own sisters married him, and she was a teenager. He was in his 80s, and she was his, I think, about 60th wife.
Wow. Did she have children with him?
No, not that I know of.
Okay.
No. So, and he was fairly sick at that time, and he passed away not too long after. And then after that, because all marriages are assigned and arranged here, after that she was assigned to another man, and I know she has had at least one child at this point with someone else.
So maybe Rulon was better to the general populace of the church, but still was doing a lot of these horrible practices behind closed doors.
That's what I don't want to think about.
Sorry.
But no, it's a valid question. But some people also are under the impression that Rulon Jeffs was doing some of these things because Warren was starting to take over at that time and was forcing his father to marry all of these women, because Warren Jeffs did take multiple of these women to be his own wives after his father died.
Wow.
So it's very sad.
And didn't he say when Rulon died, didn't Warren say that he kind of became Rulon?
Yeah.
And that was, he was taking on his personage.
Yes.
And that was why, like, that he was being reborn.
It came
Which
as
is kind of what happened with Brigham Young.
Right. Brigham Young and Joseph Smith,
yeah,
right?
because when Brigham Young said he was meant to be the predecessor, people in the meeting said he took on
he looked like Joseph Smith, right?
And then that was kind of the beginning of Brigham Young and his claim to being the prophet.
Yeah, I think that both Warren Jeffs and the entire community, including myself, we were all shocked when Rulon Jeffs died, because we were told that he was supposed to be the last prophet before Jesus Christ returned.
He said that, probably.
He said that.
He taught that.
Yes,
okay.
Rulon Jeffs taught that, and Warren Jeffs reiterated it.
Okay.
So when he died, of course, he has to come up with something that makes sense. So he says, and a lot of people assume that he was just his father. Basically, his father took over the younger body of Warren Jeffs and continued on leading the church.
Wow.
It was very confusing.
Your adolescence was when all of everything hit the fan.
Yeah.
So that was your entire teenage years, was Warren Jeffs, him fleeing, everybody trying to figure out what to do. Did you ever go to the YKZ ranch?
The YFZ?
YFZ?
Yes, yearn for Zion.
Okay. That's what it means. Okay,
Yearn for
I
Zion.
never knew what it meant.
Yes, yes. So they're in Texas. I never went. I was never righteous enough to go, which I was very sad about that at the time. I had siblings that went and then came back later, and they couldn't say one single word. It was so secretive. But I was never good enough to go and be a part of that. Now I'm grateful. But at the time, it was so secretive. Only the elite could go.
At first, it was just the leaders and like the youngest children, right? The little, at least in a book I read, basically, they said anyone under 8, they would take the kids.
That was referring specifically to Warren Jeffs' family.
Okay.
But there were other men and women through the community of all ages that went to help with the construction and the building of the place.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you weren't righteous enough.
I was never good enough, thankfully.
Did they tell you, I'm sure they never tell you what you've done that made it so you can't go. They just tell you? Or were your sins made known to you?
Yes. Oh, check this out really quick here. So you can see they even wrote on here, stillborn.
Yeah.
On the gravestone.
Jessup. Jessup is such a big FLDS name. And Lehi, that's in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, Benjamin.
I saw Don Carlos earlier. Don Carlos was one of Joseph Smith's siblings.
Yes, in fact, I was named after Joseph Smith's brother Samuel.
Okay.
In fact, my middle name is Harrison, just like his.
Wow.
I have a brother named Joseph, a brother named Don Carlos, and then a bunch from the Bible. And
in my ancestry, it's all Joseph, Samuel, never Layman. It was never Layman.
Layman. Yeah.
There's my whole family history, and that's why why they added the middle initial to the names of the prophets, because there were so many Joseph Smith prophets.
Yes, we were basically always under the impression that we were doing something not quite right, because the idea was that you were supposed to be perfect, and then if you weren't perfect, that there would be something that you did in your life that would prevent you from going to Zion, that would prevent you from allowing the people to be saved or for Jesus Christ to return. And we would get phone calls. I got this once from the bishop at the time and said, hey, Warren Jeffs told me to call. Well, they never said Warren Jeffs. It was always Uncle Warren. I received this phone call, me and multiple of my other brothers, and they said, hey, Warren Jeffs has received a revelation that you have been not following the rules, and that God has spoken to him. So we need to know, have you done this, this, or this? And they gave us a list of things. Some of these things were like, have you ever listened to Gentile music? Some things that were very likely sometime in our life we did that. You
probably have done. But basically he's trying to out you.
Well, and then of course,
almost like if you say you didn't do it, you're saying the prophet lied.
Exactly. So you have to say yes to one of the things, which of course we did something throughout our life.
Yeah.
And when we said yes, then it just reaffirmed to us that, oh my gosh, he's a prophet he's receiving revelation. He knows exactly what I'm doing. So it was very scary, but that would happen. And that's how so many of the men and women were kicked out of the town without really a good explanation other than just you weren't following the rules.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such like what crazy manipulation tactics.
Yeah.
And it's like similar things happen in Mormonism where you get your patriarchal blessing.
Right.
And it says you're going to be a mother. And you feel like you almost have to become a mother because it was prophesied. So it's a very self-fulfilling prophecy because they say it's going to happen, and then you feel like it needs to be the truth in order to prove the truth of the religion.
Back in the beginnings of the church, there were a lot of, I command you to get up and walk, very, very straightforward. And over time, even in the FLDS church, it's gotten to more based upon the will of the Lord, we give you this blessing, or if it's His will.
There's no more commanding, because it's almost like the commanding goes wrong so often.
Right.
That if they go off the rails, and like I just listened to the story about Joseph Smith, saying that a baby should rise from the dead.
Right.
And then when the baby doesn't rise from the dead, a lot of the people in that meeting end up leaving the church because they've seen hard proof that he's not actually prophesying.
Right.
And so it seems like the spiritual leaders have learned that they can't speak too definitively. Like when they say that the world's going to end. So many people have said, okay, the world will end in 1932, and then it doesn't. And it's almost like if you make too many claims, your religion will die out because people will know you're lying.
That has happened here. A lot of people, after Warren Jeffs has said in multiple occasions, and even Rutland Jeffs, that the destructions and that the end was coming on such and such date. And if it didn't happen, a lot of people wondered why. But of course, he would turn it back on the people and say, it would have, but you weren't ready. You weren't ready. You weren't prepared for it.
Yeah, I saw another thing about Warren Jeffs that he basically, when he was on the run, he was saying, God has told me I need to remove myself because the community is too evil. So once you're more righteous, I can come and minister to you. But right now I need to be removed.
Yes.
When he was really in Vegas, right? Like, I mean...
I've heard that he was in Vegas, he was at Disneyland, he was all over the place, just spending millions of dollars that the community was giving to him, assuming that it was for the building up of Zion, is what we were told.
Right.
And he was, I don't know what he was up to, but it was very frustrating to see him in these different pictures of proof that he was at these places just having a good time.
Yeah, and the FLDS, it seems like they've had millions of dollars, like in these different trusts or hidden under all the mattresses. Like, I even saw that one of these men who have come after him had a Bentley, which is like a 500, I don't know how much a Bentley costs, but they have mansions, they have, where's the money coming from?
Well, we have a gold mine. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay. I was like,
where is it?
Fan to the gold mine. Wow, I didn't know that.
No. So really, it comes down to hard work. Hard work, very little vacation, very little money spent on anything other than just the necessities for the family. And then the amount of work, other than Sunday, I was always working.
Wow.
Even Christmas and holidays, we were working.
And do you go outside of the community and work and earn money that way? And then, so a lot of the work, because I feel like it seems like you obviously did a lot of work building houses, but then a lot of that work is also outside getting money. Yeah,
so we would work in multiple different surrounding states in all kinds of construction.
Okay.
Within the community, we could build an entire house very, very easily. Everybody had different skills. So yes, we were all over, primarily in Utah, Arizona, Colorado, nearby states, doing construction work. Yep, and that's really good money. If you're good at it, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, and so was there a set tithing? Like, did you give 10%, or was it just? I guess I've heard that he would say, "I need X amount of dollars,"
right,
and everyone would scramble to try to earn it.
That was what it came to, is basically when there were these things called tithing calls, and he would say, I need every man over the age of 18 to give me $2,000.
Tithing calls.
Yes. And then they would give them $2,000. So basically every adult at least, had to have money set aside always in order to give it when called upon. Okay, so this here is now called the Most Wanted Hotel. And the reason for that name is because Warren Jeffs was on the most wanted list of the FBI. And this was a place being built for him and all of his wives. Now, he never lived here because he was put in prison before it was ever completed.
The walls, and
I do want to point out, in fact, I'll see if I can pull in here and not get shot at, but I'm just kidding.
Now it's just a hotel, right?
Now it's just a hotel. But look at these walls, how thick they are. So what this was is, you see the big gate. This was built like a prison. Yeah. In the sense that the idea was Warren Jeffs would pull in here, he would have security. The big metal gate would close behind him. Over here is where a lot of his wives were supposed to stay. And then you have this like courtyard in here that's completely surrounded with these extremely thick walls. And up ahead is another big gate. Yeah, I'm gonna pull it.
We just got kicked out.
Yeah, so there's still security there. Hey, we didn't get shot at.
No, we didn't. We got honked at.
So, and then there was another big metal gate in there where Warren Jeffs would go into that gate and it would close. So there were two huge gates that would open and close behind him to keep it very, very secure. But he never lived there because he was in prison when it finished. So, but it's crazy to see the amount of security that he was building up for himself. Okay. Oh, look at this. They're actually FLDS people. You can see here, but just by the way they're dressed, that they are still active FLDS living here. And let's see if we can get honked at again.
Yeah, that's my third sighting. I saw some at the cemetery when I went to walk around the cemetery. I saw some at what looked like a health clinic, and then that's the third time I've seen anyone.
Yeah. So this here used to be the entrance to the clinic where all of the babies, the FLDS babies, were born. This is where I was born.
Wow.
In here we had several midwives. The main one her name was Aunt Lydia, we called her. She was married to the bishop at the time. His name was Fred Jessup. And we would come here, and when a new baby was born, the family would gather here in the waiting room, and the mother would bring the baby out and pass the baby around, and we'd each get a few minutes holding the baby. But by the time I was born, there were already about 15 children born before me. Even though I had that many siblings, by the time I was born, there were already many of these siblings that were older and had moved out and were married themselves. So there weren't that many people living in the home at one time. I think that the highest, there were about 19 people living in a home.
And so these people you said are FLDS, probably.
Yes.
I mean, the blue dress is very...
They're still dressed like the FLDS. They look very much, and this guy standing here looks like he's dressed just like those of the FLDS.
And you can kind of tell, it seems like, because the men will always be wearing long sleeve shirts.
Yes.
And I know too the construction situation, right? Because they let the houses they don't completely finish the houses.
See, yes, and there's a lot of rumors about what the reason for that is. One of the most popular rumors is that they did that so that they wouldn't have to pay taxes if the home wasn't finished.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Yes, and that is very likely that some of the people did that. My home was finished, my childhood home was finished on the outside, and I don't remember us ever trying to avoid taxes or any of that kind of thing. But once again, every family was a little bit different. I always assumed when I was living here that they just didn't finish it because they ran out of money.
Oh, okay.
Because the inside of the homes were always finished, and then the outsides not always got a good finish on them. So
a house like this, I mean, there's so many houses like this in the community. Would this be a FLDS house? because it's almost like they're apartment buildings, but they're massive, and it seems like only one family lives there, but they're big enough to be apartments.
Yes, and that was the idea. In fact, right out here, this is my childhood home.
Oh, wow.
Obviously,
does anyone live there?
It's a big weed garden now. No one lives here now. It's been abandoned for quite some time.
So when you lived here, did all the moms live in one home?
Yes.
And all your siblings?
So this right here was where all 4 of the moms lived and my father. Each of them had their own room. Okay. Down here on the left side is where the boys' rooms were. And we were split up by age group, not by who's mom, who was the mom, not by who was the mom, but by age. We were split up in these different rooms, and on the right side, the girls lived in the basement.
And so how many people total were probably in this house?
About 19.
Okay, wow.
At one time. It did seem crowded at times, yes, but it was set up similar to like a hotel in the sense that there were so many rooms lining the hallways.
There's a boy up there. I think that looks like an FLDS boy.
Up where?
Up in the top above the door.
Oh.
He's watching us. He's giving us a dirty look.
Good.
You're so good at, I feel like I see the dirty looks and my soul just goes cold, and you're like, ah.
Yeah,
You're just so used to it, I guess.
I've been given many dirty looks in my day, so I'm used to it now. But yeah, my childhood home used to look better, but it is finished on the outside, unlike many of the other homes. The newly built homes, I don't believe they are FLDS.
Okay.
Currently believing in Warren Jeffs. You know what we might do is stop in front of Rulin Jeff's house as well.
Okay.
And get just perspective of what that was like. Because that's overlooked a lot because people want to go straight to Warren. But Rulin Jeffs, where he lived also, is where Warren Jeffs had his office and would meet with people, and a lot of the young girls would go to find out they're getting married in this office.
What are the primary differences growing up as a man versus a woman FLDS? Because I know you're separated for a lot of that. So if you maybe could just walk us through, like, what is the average life like for a FLDS woman versus a man?
So the women are told that their primary purpose in life is to bear children and raise those children and take care of the home. That is the primary purpose. And in doing all of that, be obedient to their husband, because the husband is the priesthood holder, man of the house, the one that's in charge. And then, of course, the husband is supposed to listen and obey the prophet of the church. So, with that said, it's clear that the man is in charge, and all of the women are supposed to just obey him. So, the responsibility of the man, be perfectly obedient to the prophet, make sure that the wives are being obedient to you, and provide for the family. So, that's there were some differences between each family, but that's the generic rule on what they were supposed to do. Now, growing up in my childhood home, it was very clear that the boys were allowed to get out and do outdoor things and play and get dirty and that type of thing a lot more than the girls were. My sisters would complain about always having to do the laundry and the cleaning and all of the different things around the home while the boys got to go out and play. We weren't supposed to be playing. We were supposed to be working in the garden or doing something that could be some type of work or make some kind of money. But we would play a lot as young boys, just, trying to keep entertained. But the girls, I guess that it was a lot more scary for the girls, because
you're probably just kind of waiting for the day that you become a plural wife. So you're kind of training.
Yeah, it would be a lot more scary for the girls because they have no idea at what age they're going to get married. For the boys, I was under the impression, and most of the time, the boys were in their 20s before they would get married. So not that that's old, but it's a lot better than
older than 12
or 16 years old. Yes. So for the boys, it wasn't such a scary thing, but for the girls, You could be called at age 14. One of my sisters was 14 years old. Got called that she was to get married to a man that was in his 40s, and she was to be his second wife. Now,
Wow.
That's just a scary phone call. Just so scary. I remember.
And the dad just has to come and say, all right, you've been called to be married.
Yeah, I remember the day that happened. In fact, it was two of my sisters got the call at the same time, and by they didn't get the call from the prophet, but my father did. And if you say no to the prophet, you're saying no to God. So you can't say no. He's conditioned to believe that it's coming straight from God.
And he's staked everything he has on being part of this religion.
Exactly.
So if he says no, he gets kicked out.
Right.
And his whole 30-person family.
Yeah. I mean, now that I have a daughter of my own, I know I think and act differently than I did when I was a part of the FLDS. So it's easy for me to say this now, but I would never allow that to happen to my daughter. But when you're in it, I was never a father in the FLDS. And so I can't say how hard that must have been, believing in it and getting that phone call.
Yeah.
But I do remember my sisters, both of them. The one that was 14, she was almost 15, but she was still 14. And then my other sister, I believe, was, I think she was 16 or 17. Both got a call at the same time, and they just, beat red faces, very, very embarrassed at the idea of it, and then just scared, crying.
How much time do they have to come to terms with the fact that they're going to be married to these men?
In most cases, it was just a matter of a couple days.
Wow.
And they didn't know these men. They didn't have any idea what they were getting into, other than they just assumed it was called of God, and so it should be okay.
And it sounds like some families, like your family that you were born into, are more kind and it's a better environment. Mm-hmm. But you don't know if you're going to be married into a family where there's physical abuse, or I don't even know how much anybody is talking about physical or sexual abuse.
So anything to do with sex wasn't talked about. There were people that got married, and this is a very popular story that goes around because it's so shocking. There were people that got married in the FLDS church, and after a year or so of not having any children, went to ask the local nurse what was going on. And come to find out, they weren't trying.
They weren't having sex.
No. They just assumed.
They just thought that marriage means you'll become impregnated.
Yes.
Wow.
They were like four-year-old kids that just assumed you get married and you have a kid. And
so like the stork will just come along.
Right. Yeah, so it was very much
And then does
taboo.
The nurse in that case, would she instruct them, finally someone's going to tell them how to have sex?
At that point, yes, they were told, you have to do something, right? You can't just hope that it happens. But that type of thing happened. And from my personal experience, I was never taught anything about sex. Nothing.
Which is so crazy that it's a cult. It's a religion or a cult or whatever you prefer to say, built on sex. Like polygamy is about, obviously to the FLDS, it's about the religion, but it's also about spreading your seed,
It is, and that it's a sad thought to think about the fact that just goes to show how much control the man had over the women. If you're not teaching the women what is supposed to happen or what is going to happen,
you're just sending the girl in
sending
blind.
them in, and then the guy just teaches and says what he wants to say, if this is how it's supposed to be done. Now, who knows how they're introducing that to the girls?
Yeah.
The girls are just thinking, well, this is what God wants me to do, so here we go.
And it could be potentially different depending on which marriage, because it's so not talked about that.
Right.
Which really, if you'd never talk about sex, there's so much it leaves the door wide open for abuse. I mean,
exactly.
It's not even just at that point about the age difference between the man and the woman. It's also just that the woman has literally no idea even what consent is, no idea how to, like, you can say no. None of those messages are ever given, I'm sure.
Well, and they have no idea what to expect either. So even if abuse is happening to them, they wouldn't know that it's abuse. They would assume this is normal because it's the only experience they've ever had. Like, I wonder, well, I'll just share an experience. This isn't about sex, but just an awkward topic that I went to my mother about. I said, in the Bible, it talks about circumcision. Okay. And I said, what is circumcision? That was the most awkward conversation I've ever had in my life with my mother about something so simple. Yeah. Because it was in the Bible, and so I was curious.
Yeah. Or even it says, the Virgin Mary. My sister once asked me, what does virgin mean? And we were probably 16 and 18. And she's like, what does virgin mean? We still are trying so hard to cobble together an understanding of what any of this means.
Right.
And I remember asking my mom what the word bitch means. And it was the same thing where I asked at the dinner table. I probably was in 3rd grade, and it was like everyone's silverware clattered to the table, and everyone stares at me like, where did you hear that word? You can't see that friend again. We never say that. And it just helps you learn that you're basically punished for bringing up sensitive subjects to your parents.
Right. So next time you have a question, what are you going to do?
And did you have internet access?
No.
I mean, most people now would just Google it.
Right. See, I didn't have internet. So in one of the school buildings, there was a biology book. So I did learn some things in that biology
book. The holy book.
Right. I was like, whoa.
Finally.
But had I been caught looking at that book, I would have been in big trouble.
Yeah. And your garments, because more mainstream Mormon garments are it's like a cap sleeve and it goes down to your knee. But your garments, I think I read you start wearing them at 3 years old.
It wasn't...
Or just in childhood you start wearing them?
From as early as I can remember, we started wearing them.
And those are wrist and ankle.
Wrist, and it's actually how the original garment of the mainstream church, Mormon church, was presented, except for it doesn't have markings.
Yours didn't have markings?
No markings.
Even the adults?
Even the adults.
Wow.
So, but it was a full one piece with a slit in the crotch area that you would put normal boxers or underwear over your underwear.
Wow.
So, but it was like a full piece garment, and then it would either snap up in the front or button up in the front.
And so it's so interesting to see how like the vestiges of Mormonism stayed with the FLDS. But your first temple was the temple in Texas, right? Because this community does not have a temple. Right. I was thinking about that when I was looking at the FLDS cemetery. If you look at a Mormon cemetery, there's handshakes. A lot of the gravestones have handshakes. Or the more modern gravestones have temples. That'll be the temple that the couple was married in. Whereas your gravestones don't have any temple symbolism. Right. Which is so, because the temple is like the heart of Mormonism. But where's your temple?
Okay, so that's a great question. So we were always told that the temple was coming, that the people were not prepared for the work in the temple yet, and that all of the work being done in the mainstream Mormon churches or temples was blasphemy. It wasn't done correctly. That's what we were told. And that the temples were coming when the people were prepared enough. That's why the YFZ, did I say that right? Yearning for Zion? Yes, the YFZ ranch in Texas, a temple coming there was such a big deal because finally people were righteous enough to go. Right. But it was once again put on the people that the temple was coming, but we weren't prepared for it yet.
So interesting.
However,
you'd think that with all of the money that the FLDS had, they would have built one sooner. Because when I saw the pictures of the interior of, what is it again? The Yearning for Zion temple. When I saw the interior of that temple, it looks like they're mimicking the LDS temple. They have the baptismal font. I saw a room where they have a mural, which is like a mural that looks like the Garden of Eden. Yes. Which is what would be a normal, like a LDS, mainstream LDS temple. Similar, yes. They had I think they had a veil. They had a celestial room, it looked like. So it looks like they were mimicking the mainstream Mormon church. And I'm curious, like, where they even got that information.
So So the information was passed down from the beginnings of the church, because the temple clothing, like you're familiar with, all of the symbolism and all that, Reuel Jeffs, when he died, he was buried in those clothes.
Really?
Temple clothes.
Mainstream Mormon temple clothes.
It looks the same.
But was he endowed?
I can't imagine that he was ever a part, or that he was endowed in the mainstream.
Yeah, because they were fully excommunicated.
Long before he was the prophet.
But still, I wonder where they get that. I wonder where they get the clothing.
So, but it wasn't too far back where the members that became FLDS, or became the beginnings of the FLDS church, were originally a part of the mainstream, and then they broke off from it. Okay. So that's where I think those ideas came from, and they just passed them down through the church. Yeah. So this is Reuel Jeff's house. Yes, well, this is a part of it. There are so many. It says "Keep Sweet." Do you see that? Oh, hey! I never knew that there were two chimneys that said "Keep Sweet" on them. But as you can see, there are multiple homes within this gated off compound. And how many houses do you think are in this commune? Or how many people could live here? The one that says "Keep Sweet," I think that is still attached to Reuel Jeff's old home. That is a really big home that had a lot of additions added to it as he married more wives. But I would say there are probably, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 6 or 7 homes within this compound. And then if you hold this, then I can show like how big these walls are. They're like, I don't know if the camera makes it easy to tell. I'm 5'7". I mean, yeah, they are very big walls, and solid brick. I helped with the construction of these walls. Okay. When I was younger, I mean, and look how they go so far. So many places in this community have just the most wild walls. And surprisingly, you would never guess this, but a lot of the walls have been taken down. Really? Because I feel like there's so many that I have seen driving around. So as we get up here in front of what used to be Reuel Jeff's home, the wall has been shortened so that you can actually see the home. When Warren Jeffs was here, you couldn't even see what was going on behind any of these walls. The gates were always closed. The wall that has now been shortened was... This is the shortened one? Yes, it used to be way taller, so you couldn't see anything within the walls. Wow. But you can peek in here, you see the white door there. Mm-hmm. That is the door to the offices where people would come to meet with Reuel Jeffs or Warren Jeffs. Warren Jeffs also had an office right inside those doors. Okay. And they would come to get instructions about who they're supposed to marry. If you had an interview about something bad maybe you did and had to go get in trouble with the leadership, that was the door I walked through as a young boy when I first met and shook the hands with Reuel Jeffs and Warren Jeffs. So it was a very special moment for me. Was it really scary? Did you feel similarly to how you felt when you met Elder Holland? No, because I was younger and I had been taught my entire life that these men were the greatest thing on earth. They were constantly talking with God. So when I walked in through those doors there, I literally felt in my heart that I had entered a heavenly place, and the peace and the love that I felt was just so overwhelming because of what I believe these people were and how special they were. And now to know that so much abuse and so much just uncomfortable things to even talk about were happening right through these windows and walls. And because of the way I was raised, though, I of course would have never in a million years imagined that something bad was happening in there. Yeah, especially when you don't know about sex, when you don't really know anything. It reminds me of when I went to General Conference for the first time and I saw the prophets sitting there, and you literally think you're sitting in the same room as somebody who has spoken with God face to face. Uh-huh. And even to be in the same room with someone who has spoken to God face to face feels like a transcendent experience. It does, yes. And yes. You know, the warm fuzzies, you definitely get them because you're thinking to yourself, that person over there go back down this
literally way. Saw God.
Yeah, it's a surreal experience, and of course, like you mentioned, I also had a similar experience where I met Elder Holland after I had left the FLDS, joined the mainstream LDS church, and had been taught about the apostles and prophets. But I was so new to the church, I didn't think it was a big deal. I thought, oh, everybody in the church sees the prophet. Everybody gets to go and meet the apostles. Not, so it was a special experience. And Elder Holland was very kind. It was a very nice visit that we had. But because I was so new to the church, it would have been so, yes, it would have been so different for someone like yourself.
Yeah, if I met Elder Holland when I was on my mission or something, I'm sure I would have felt exactly like what you're describing.
Yeah.
And I think it's that feeling, and then when you go talk to everyone else and everyone else is saying the same thing, I felt so happy. I felt the spirit so strongly. It's very affirming.
Yes.
You feel like this is obviously God's true church on the earth, because I'm feeling these feelings, everyone else is feeling these feelings.
Yes,
you can rent. You could come and live here if you wanted to.
Right. Yes.
I don't know. Have you ever thought about moving back here, along with some of the people you've said have done the same?
So I've thought about coming out and trying to buy a home or buy a property here just to have something, but my wife is a city girl.
Yeah.
And this is a small town in the middle of nowhere.
Very small.
It would be hard to get her to move here. And not that I am really wanting to that much either, but you could.
I chose to not stay in Utah after I left the church, so.
Oh, look, all the doors are open.
Just goes to the parking lot.
Man, it's just crazy to be able to see through all the gates. All the doors are unlocked, because when I lived here, you would see Warren Jeffs pull up in his car. We'll get to the gate he would go through here in a minute. And the gate would open, he would pull in, the gate would close behind him, and you would never see him get out of his car.
And even as a member, you don't get to have, you don't even know what his special world is like.
Yeah, you just assume that he's talking with God and that he's doing things that are so important that it's some little person like me, it's none of my business. It's just what I assumed.
Yeah, there are underground tunnels underneath BYU. And there's apparently also all over Salt Lake, so that the prophets and everybody can move through Salt Lake without having anybody see them. And how there's also apparently stone in the mountains. There's a vault with all of the family history and stuff. And I feel like Mormonism, they just are really good at building their little secret fortresses.
Wanting to persecute us.
And that's the Dream Center.
Yeah. And here is now the Dream Center, and the gate/garage that Warren Jeffs would pull into. Yeah, you can see this massive gate.
Which it's crazy that within this community, which at the time was already probably almost only FLDS. Right. That there's a gate within this community. You'd think maybe once you got past a certain level, then everybody gets to be kind of part of the community, but it seems like the community is closed off even from itself. Right. Which is wild.
Yeah, it's crazy, and I think that a large part of that was because Warren Jeffs wanted people to feel that he was too important to be seen just out with the normal people in the public, and that there was too much going on. Not to mention that there was a lot of government and officials and stuff, like the FBI, trying to find him. So that's another reason that he was trying to hide.
And even someone else said that at night, a lot of the families would be moving around, or people would be going from house to house. I don't know if that's...
Yep, yes. And so that was all done around the time I left and after I had left. I didn't experience that, but yes, that type of thing did happen, where people were constantly being moved so that they could never feel that they had a real grasp on life, that they had to just kind of,
or roots.
Yeah, so they could be willing to be moved and just told to do whatever, whenever, and it made it very difficult for them to feel enough self-confidence to stand up against the church or stand up against anyone and possibly leave, because they were always being told that they needed to move. And
it's a crazy gate. Would this have also been part of?
Yep, so one of Warren Jeffs' brothers would have lived there.
Wow.
So it was all within this big wall.
We briefly touched on it, but maybe just to go into it a little bit more, is how our faiths viewed each other.
Yes.
From Mormon to FLDS. For me as a Mormon, we always very much viewed the FLDS as the crazy cult. They're not like us. We're righteous and holy, and they're the apostates. And kind of like, I would say I first got introduced to the FLDS maybe when just around the time of Warren Jeffs, and asking my mom, hey, are they like us? And she was like, no, we're completely different. And she differentiated so much that I would have even said, you guys don't read the Book of Mormon.
Wow.
You don't worship Joseph Smith. You don't talk about the history with Joseph Smith. And turns out there's like way more similarities than I really reckoned for.
Depending on the person you talk to, I know multiple families in St. George, which is the city nearby here, that would say that the FLDS people weren't bad people. Of course, Warren Jeffs is bad, but that the people are good, and they're so close to believing things the correct way, but they're just slightly led astray, but will be easily convinced that the mainstream LDS church is the truth on the other side. So
yeah, that's pretty compelling.
Yeah, so just depending on the family. Of course, other people would say that the FLDS is the worst religion in the world and that they're nothing like us, so it just depended on the family. But I will say how we as FLDS members looked at the mainstream LDS church was that they were the great and abominable church talked about in the Book of Mormon.
Oh, because we learned that was the Catholic Church.
Always somebody's gonna, and the reason we looked at the mainstream church that way is because they were this big fancy church with the big fancy temples.
Yeah, great and spacious building.
The great and spacious building, and that they were just trying to show off how fancy they were, and that they had the fancy clothing, and things like that. And we're over here meek and humble and have our plain, clothes and dresses and things. And so we thought the Mormon church has similar doctrine, but they have fallen astray. And of course, they will have a chance to repent on the other side.
Which is so nice. I mean, we're both kind of coming at it in the same way, which is on the other side. Because did you guys have Spirit of Prison, Spirit of Paradise?
Oh, yes. Okay, very similar.
The afterlife is really a second lease on life for every person who's ever lived. I mean, I feel like the Mormon loophole is to never learn about anything in this life, have your fun, and then in the afterlife be taught the gospel and then convert once you have more proof that God is actually, the Mormons were right all along.
If you apostatize from the church, if you leave the church, you're done. Goodbye.
That's like your soul is straight to hell, basically. Yep. Wow.
You gave up what you knew to be true. You denied Christ, is what they would say. And you made that decision. Therefore, there's no hope for you in the next life. You're done.
Wow. So it's basically like outer darkness?
Yes.
Like those who leave the FLDS go straight to outer darkness?
Yes, because that's the worst sin you could possibly commit, is leaving the church. And that's why it's so hard to make that decision, because if you choose to leave, you're not only leaving your mortal family behind to potentially never see them again, but you're also giving up your eternity in the next life. You are agreeing to hellfire and damnation, outer darkness for the rest of eternity.
Wow.
So it's a scary thought. And I believe that.
Yeah.
I believed it. And even when I left, I still was very nervous that I would be struck by lightning, that something bad would happen to me at any moment, because I was told that I was being completely controlled by Satan if I choose to leave. It's sad though, because they believe that.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to believe it. I know my mother here in the FLDS, she believes that I am lost for all eternity because of the decision I made. I don't get to see her. I haven't seen her in 15 years.
Wow. I think a lot of people have said, how could a mother do that? To most people, they see that and they say, it's incomprehensible for someone to leave their child like that. Do you think because it's common, it's like, well, my sister did that to her child, and she's so, do you know what I mean? Maybe it's just so normalized that it doesn't feel as horrible as a lot of people view it.
The reason that I'm just the worst in my mother's eyes is because I was the first of her children to leave.
Okay.
And since then, I've had multiple of my siblings that have left as well. And so I'm not the only one anymore. I think that she does still hold a lot of hope for her other children that are in the church, and that she will at least have an eternal life with them. So it's still very heartbreaking, but I know that if I could talk to her today, she would just beg me, please repent and come back. You know this is the truth. Even if she doesn't fully believe that I could come back if I wanted to, she's still going to beg, because that's all she wants for me, is to be with her again.
Do you think she knows you have a YouTube channel?
No. I know that...
I mean, I guess she doesn't use the internet.
She doesn't, but I do know that some people within the FLDS have found my YouTube channel and growing up in polygamy, and they have definitely not appreciated me talking about, even though I try to be as respectful as I can while sharing facts, they do not appreciate me saying things the way they are.
Yeah. Which is exactly how I have experienced, but I feel like this conversation is obviously made clear. I feel like the FLDS is just Mormonism times 1,000. And so while my family is disappointed, and I would even say potentially slightly heartbroken that I have this channel, your family, I mean, first of all, they don't even talk to you.
It came down to a choice that I felt I had to make. I had to make the decision to live a life for myself, or be told exactly how to live my life for the rest of my life.
You die.
I didn't
and you
want
only
that.
you only get one, and then you die. And if you used your life to follow a religion that's false, it's just a waste.
Yes.
I mean, it's not a complete waste, but in some ways it's at least a small waste, in my opinion, to dedicate your life to something that is not true.
Right, and that's kind of what it came down to. Is if I remember thinking, actually, when I was still in the FLDS church, I remember thinking, if I come to find out one day that this church is not true, I am going to be pissed because I'm living this very restrictive life because I believe it's true. And I'm not that mad anymore. Now I'm just sad. I'm just sad that I don't get to be with my family or a lot of my family and that. But it's, I'm happy to be where I'm at. I'm happy to have the family I have today, and the kids I have, and the wife I have, and just have built such a beautiful life for myself. Of course, those still believing in the FLDS church would probably look at me and say, look how dark and awful his life is, because that's just what they believe. But I know what I have.
He's just out here watching Disney movies.
Yeah, exactly. How dare he?
Yeah.
But I know what I have, and I wouldn't change it for anything.
Well, that's very beautiful, and I'm sure people tell you a lot that you're very brave.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Well, you are. I mean, sometimes I feel like when I talk about leaving the Mormon church, I feel like I'm being melodramatic, because it's not a religion you have to escape with $20 in your pocket.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost, it still has such a strong psychological hold that it is really hard to leave. But I mean, I think leaving something like the FLDS, where you're literally never speaking to your mother and father and siblings again, I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah. I have had I don't want to completely say I've never talked to them again. I have on occasion. It used to be less strict, so I have on occasion had an opportunity to speak with my mother and speak with my father. Okay. But that's how I know that all she would say to me is, please come back, because I've had that experience with her. But I haven't seen or given her a hug in at least 15 years at this point. Yeah.
Do you think that maybe when she's older and maybe nearing death, you'll have that opportunity?
I sure hope so. It's one of those things that in her mind, in all of the FLDS mind, this life is just a very small blip. Just come down and prove yourself. That's it. Just prove yourself. That's all. It's not a very big thing. And then the next life is where it all begins. That's where the eternity living with God, happiness, all the goodness begins, right?
Yeah.
So
for her, I don't think she would have like a dying wish that I would get to see her. I think that she would just say, he made his choice.
Yeah.
I'm off to the eternities. But I would hope, all I can do is hope that I will get that opportunity before she passes on. Hopefully she has a lot more years ahead of her, but you never know. You never know.
Hey everyone, Sam here with Growing Up in Polygamy. Me and my wife talk about a lot of experiences both within the FLDS church. My wife was raised mainstream LDS, so we do a lot of comparing FLDS versus LDS in our videos. Today I am here with Alyssa. It's been a lot of fun walking around my hometown here where I was raised in the FLDS church. I was raised with Warren Jeffs as my childhood prophet, so had a lot of experiences with him. He's currently in prison, but still leading the church today. So check us out on Growing Up in Polygamy. Hope you enjoy.